Hello and welcome everyone on this official platform of Legacy IS Academy. So today we are going to discuss the chapter number 4 of class 8th NCERT. जी हाँ. So today we are going to discuss the chapter number 4 of class 8th NCERT. Now this chapter is related to the colonial era in India. Yes, this is something related to colonial era in India. Fine. Okay. Now, when we say colonial era in India, that means this chapter is related to modern India. It is related to modern India. In the previous video, we have completed the story of Marathas, then the great female Maratha warrior Ahilya Bai Holkar. So these things we have discussed. Okay, fine. Now this chapter is specifically related to modern India. That is something related to colonialism. So we can say now how this modern India, so since when modern India was started, so most of the scholars, they say modern India starts after the death of Aurangzeb. Fine. Okay, but when we start with modern India, na, the first important thing that we need to understand, the topic is advent of Europeans. And this advent of Europeans is something, it is related to medieval India. Medieval India. Fine. Medieval India in the sense like in 1498. Okay. Vasco da Gama came and discovered the direct sea route towards India. Fine. So it is something which is related to part of medieval India and then modern India. Okay. So now let's begin with this chapter. Now, as you can see here, some important questions. So, what are the important questions that are given in this chapter? Like, first is what is colonialism? What do you understand by this term colonialism? Clear? So, we'll discuss all these things. Then, what drew European powers to India? What was India's economic and geopolitical standing before and during the colonial period? Then, how did the British colonial dominion, okay, or domination of India impacted the country? So after reading this chapter, we are going to understand these four questions, okay, easily. Now, so first of all, as I have said, it started with the advent of Europeans. Okay, this is something, advent of Europeans. Now this advent of European topic, it was started from 1498. Fine. As you can see here, Vasco da Gama arrival at Calicut. Clear? So there are five important European powers, okay, in chronology. First, Portuguese. Second were Dutch. Third European power to come, British. Fourth, Danes, Denmark, traders from Denmark, and Dutch. They were the traders from Netherlands. And then last, French. Clear? These four powers, these five powers, and these are in chronology. This chronology you should know. Fine? Okay. So now we are going to discuss these things. So first of all, we need to understand the age of colonialism. Okay. So as you can see here, in the previous chapter, as I have said, we talked about Marathas. Clear? And when Marathas were rising, Mughal Empire started weakening. That is something related to modern India only, from where modern India starts. And before they themselves succumbed to the British forces early in 19th century. Clear? So, and yet military campaigns were only one factor in India becoming the jewel in the crown of British Empire. And military factor is one of the most important reasons that how Britishers they made their empire in India. Okay, so fine. Now we are going to start with the age of colonialism. Okay. Now first we need to understand what do you understand by this concept? What is colonialism? See, what is colonialism? As you can see, definition is there. Colonial is actually a practice where one country takes the control of another region. Okay, where one country takes the control of another region. Now, when we say takes the control of another region, that means they started establishing the settlements there, just like British and other European powers did, and they start imposing their political, economic, and cultural system. That is what we called as colonialism. So, this is the definition of colonialism. Important for your examination also. Fine. Okay. Now, so now try to understand. Now, what is the historical context of colonialism? Now we need to understand historical context. Historical context of colonialism. Fine. Okay. See, colonialism is not a recent occurrence. It is not a recent phenomenon. Remember this thing. It is not a recent phenomenon. Fine. Okay. It can be traced to different period of time. Clear? Like great empires were there. They used to occupy other areas in first millennium BC. Clear? Then spread of Christianity also, a form of in medieval times there was a spread of Christianity, that is also a form of colonialism. Then Islam also involved in capturing other areas, that is also a form of colonization of territories and converted to new faiths. So all these things are related to colonialism. Okay. Now when we talk about the age of colonialism, as you can see here, the age of colonialism. So when we say age of colonialism, it actually refers to Europe expansion from 15th century onwards. Yes, whenever we use the term the colonialism, it is generally referred to the Europe expansion from 15th century onwards. Fine. So European powers, like various European powers like Spain, Portugal, Britain, France, Netherlands, they actually established their colonies across Africa, Asia, America, Australia, and many Pacific islands also. Clear? So they actually conquered the large region of the world. Fine. This is something which is very important. Okay. Now, what are the motivations for colonization? Now we need to understand the motivations for colonization. So this paragraph is something related to the motivation for colonization. Motivation for colonization. Okay. So what are the motivations for colonization? First thing is political competition, as you can see here. This is the first point. Now, what is political competition here? See, there was a race for territorial expansion among European powers, clear, as well as global influence. So, there was a race for territorial competition or territorial expansion between the European power, like Spain was competing with Portugal, Britain competing with France, these things. Second important thing, economic advantages. This was another motivation. Second is economic advantages. So when we say economic advantages, which means they got access to new natural resources, they got new markets, new trade routes also, and they started plunder. Clear? They started plunder of wealth, or you can say extraction of wealth. Okay, extraction of wealth. Fine. Third important thing, they also started, third point, religious conversion. Religious conversion. That means they started converting the indigenous populations into Christianity. That was a very powerful motivation. And then last important thing was scientific inquiry. So we have discussed 4 points in motivation for colonization. First, political competition. Second, economic advantages. Third, religious conversion. And fourth was scientific inquiry. Clear? That means accumulating, they started accumulating the knowledge of geography. Okay, as you can see here, they started accumulating the knowledge of geography, natural history, all these things. So they had a desire to explore the unknown lands. Clear? Okay. Now, with respect to this, there are some colonial myths and reality. Now, this is something related to colonial myths versus reality. Now, when we say colonial myths versus reality, okay, first myth is that they actually claimed that they are on the civilizing mission. This is the first thing. Clear? Claimed mission, civilizing mission. Clear? So they used to say that Britishers generally they used to say that they were on the civilizing mission to bring progress to the colonized people. Fine. This is something, and they used to call colonized people as primitive or barbaric, or demonized as savage. And reality was very different. Fine. Reality was in this way, they came in the name of a civilizing mission, but in this way, the indigenous people, they lost their independence, exploitation of resources was started, clear. Then destruction of traditional ways of life was started, and they started imposing their foreign cultural values, clear, that we need to understand. Fine. Okay. Now we need to understand what was India's pre-colonial status. Fine. Okay. So first try to understand what was India's pre-colonial status. So as you can see here, Europeans in India. Now this is first thing, this is going to tell us pre-colonial status. Pre-colonial status. Okay. Now what was India's pre-colonial status? See, India had historical trade relations with Greeks, okay, with Greeks and Romans for over 2 millennia ago. Clear? Okay. What Indians used to export? Indian used to export spices, cotton, ivory, gems, sandalwood, teak wood, then wood, steel, and also other commodities. Where? In Mediterranean world. That means European world. Fine. Okay. So what was the economic understanding or economic standing before 16th century? Now this is something which is very important, as you can see here. So what was the economic standing before 16th century? Fine. Okay. So what was the economic standing? First, India was actually a vibrant and cultural powerhouse. India was a vibrant economic and cultural powerhouse. This is the first thing in 16th century. Clear? And second important thing, India's estimated GDP was at least one fourth of the world. Remember this thing. India's GDP was at least one fourth of the GDP of the world. Fine. These things are very important that we need to understand. One fourth of the world during this whole period. Clear? And two largest economies globally, including China. Clear? Whose contribution was also same in the order. Fine. Okay. Now, apart from this, India is actually renowned for various manufacturing. So India is actually noted for मैन्युफैक्चरिंग कैपेबिलिटीज के लिए जाना जाता था. इंडिया वॉज नोन फॉर डाइवर्स एग्रीकल्चरल आउटपुट. इंडिया वॉज नोन फॉर एक्सटेंसिव इंटरनल एज वेल एज एक्सटर्नल ट्रेडिंग नेटवर्क्स. क्लियर? And apart from this, you can see the high quality textiles were also there. Fine. So apart from this, India is also known for high quality textile. High quality textile. Fine. This was the relevance. Okay. Now, what was the political context? You know, what was the political context here? Okay. So, what was the political context? First thing is when European came, Mughal Empire. So, Mughal Empire was weakened. Fine. Regional kingdoms emerged. Regional kingdoms emerged. Fine. And third important thing is local governance. Local governance. That means well organized village councils were there, system of self governance was there. Now we'll talk about the European colonization in India. So there is one chart also, okay, that I would like to show here. So there is one chart related to European colonization. As you can see, in 1498 we have discussed Vasco da Gama came. 1510, Portuguese captured Goa. Fine. 1560, clear, they Portuguese created their establishment in Goa. Fine. Then apart from this, as you can see, various 1674 French East India Company, they set up their trading company in Pondicherry. Clear. So various events are mentioned in this. Fine. So all these events we are going to discuss now. So who were the first power who came to India? They were Portuguese. Clear. So first we'll talk about Portuguese. Okay. Commerce and atrocities. Along with Portuguese, this is also written commerce and atrocities. Now, if you see Portuguese, they were actually, you can say, important power from 1498 to 1800s. Okay. Now, first we need to understand the initial phase. This is something related to initial phase. Fine. Okay. Now, the Portugal explorer and navigator Vasco da Gama arrived near Kozhikode in Kerala in May 1498. Fine. So Vasco da Gama came, arrival of Vasco da Gama in 1498. That actually paved the way for beginning of European colonization in India. Fine. Okay. Now, initially you'll see he was well received by Zamorin. He was well received by Zamorin. Zamorin was the ruler of Calicut. Ruler of Calicut. Fine. Okay. Now, his aggressive ways failed to establish friendly relations with local. Clear? So, remember this thing. Aggressive ways of Vasco da Gama failed to establish friendly relations with the local rulers. Fine. Okay. Then Vasco da Gama again came back during his second voyage 4 years later. That means in 1502. Again, Vasco da Gama came back in 1502. Then he seized, tortured, and killed Indian merchants. So Vasco da Gama, this time period, he started killing the Indian merchants, and he also bombarded Calicut from sea. This much is clear. And soon after this, Portuguese started the territorial expansion. Portuguese captured the strategic ports like Goa in 1510. So in 1510, Portuguese conquered Goa. Clear? And Goa became capital of Portuguese in India. Fine. So Portuguese established Goa as well as other several trading posts as well as Malabar centers, Coromandel coast as their trading posts. Fine. Okay. With respect to economic strategies, so what was their economic strategies? This paragraph is related to economic strategies. Fine. So Portuguese, they implemented one system called as Cartas. What is Cartas system? It is like trade passes. Now Goa was under the control of Portuguese. Portuguese also established their supremacy in Indian Ocean region. Clear. Now, if any Indian ruler will send its goods, so they need to take a license from Portuguese. Now, if Indian rulers they are not going to take the license from Portuguese, in that case, Indian ships will be seized. Indian ships will be confiscated by the Portuguese. This much is clear. Okay. So remember this thing. It required all ships in Arabian Sea to purchase the Portuguese permit for navigation, and if the ships without permits were seized, this actually created naval dominance of Portuguese and allowed them to monopolize the spice trade between India and Europe. Because of this, they wanted to monopolize the spice trade between India and Europe. Fine. Okay. After this, as you can see, after this, so they also started religious persecution. This is another point. Religious persecution. How religious persecution? See, they established their control in Goa. Okay. In 1510, they have captured Goa. Now, they started establishing their territories in Goa in around 1560. From 1560s onward, they started establishing their territories in Goa. Clear? In which they started persecuting the indigenous Hindus, Muslim, Jews. Clear? All these people. And Christian converts suspected of practicing their original faith. तो जो Christian convert थे उनको भी मारा because they had a suspicion that they are actually practicing their original faith. Clear? This is something which is disastrous in nature. Fine? Okay. So they started converting the people. So they started forced conversion. They started forced conversion and destroyed many Hindu temples in Goa region. Clear? And various other forms of abuse in Goa region. Clear? So Goa Inquisition was only abolished in 1812. Fine? Okay. Now when Portuguese were there at the same time in western coast, when Portuguese were there at the same time in western coast, okay, the port town Ulal present day in southern Karnataka. It was the important trading point which was controlled by Rani Abaka I. है ना. Ulal was controlled by Rani Abaka I. Clear? Now, why she is important? She actually thwarted the Portuguese attempt through strategic alliances. Clear? So, in 16th century, Portuguese repeatedly attempt to take this port, Ulal also, but Rani Abaka formed strategic alliances with neighboring kingdoms and she resisted, she thwarted their attempts. Clear? ठीक है. Later, she was actually captured and died fighting in prison. She was captured and she died fighting in prison. And her successor was Rani Abaka II. Clear? Now, it is said that Rani Abaka II created the fireballs out of coconut shells. She created fireballs out of coconut shell and she actually used those fireballs to set several ships of Portuguese Navy on fire. Fine. So these inspirational stories, when we see these inspirational stories, are remembered even in a very important drama from Karnataka that is called as Yakshangana. These inspirational stories of Rani Abaka 1 and 2 are mentioned in Yakshagana, which is a kind of theater from Karnataka. Fine. Okay. Now, after Portuguese, the important, we can say, the next important Europeans were Dutch. Now, we'll talk about Dutch. Fine. Now, Dutch commerce and competition from 1600 to 1700s. Fine. Now, what are the characteristics? So first of all, Dutch arrived in India early 17th century. Clear? But they were not like Portuguese. Clear? Dutch main focus was on dominance, commercial dominance, particularly spice trade. डच का मेन फोकस किस पे था? कमर्शियल पे. ओके, their main focus was not on religious conversion. Clear? So finally you'll see that they have established Dutch East India Company and they have created various trading ports in various parts of India, like on west coast Surat. Okay, so Surat was there, Bharuch was there, Kochi was there. These were the ports on the western coast. East coast, Nagapatnam, Masulipatinam, present day Machilipatnam. Clear? These important ports were there. Okay. Now, Dutch also established their important strong presence in Malabar region of Kerala. Clear? And in Kerala, Dutch displaced the Portuguese people. Dutch defeated Portuguese people from their several trading centers. Fine. Okay. Now, after this, as you can see here, see this image first. Okay. So, this actually reflects a depiction of the surrender of Dutch forces to King Martand-Varma of Travancore in the Battle of Colachel 1741. Clear? This is a very important battle. Fine. Now, we'll discuss about this battle. So, 1741, as you can see here, the Battle of Colachel. In this battle, the Travancore ruler Martand-Varma defeated the Dutch forces. Travancore ruler Martand-Varma defeated Dutch forces. Fine, both on land as well as sea. Clear? And this battle was a rare instance of an Asian power successfully defeating the European colonial force. Clear? Now, so after this battle only, the presence of Dutch significantly started decreasing. Clear? Okay. Now, next important European power which came, French. Now we'll talk about French and their colonial ambitions. Their timeline is on 1668 to 1800. Clear? Now, first of all, we need to understand the establishment. Fine? Okay. Now, what was their establishment? So, French, they entered in India later and their first trading post was at Surat in 1668. But their main trading center was Pondicherry, which they have established in 1674. Clear? In Pondicherry, they have established their East India Company and they also developed their ambitious plans. They developed their imperial plan to develop the French Empire in India. Fine? Okay. Now, as you can see this name, Dupleix. Dupleix was the greatest French governor. He was the great and powerful, most powerful French governor. Fine? Okay. Now we need to understand about Dupleix. Clear? So Duplic was the one who also started or who developed the colonial strategies. Colonial strategies. Fine. Okay. Now, so Duplic, what he did, he trained the Indian soldiers. Now try to understand. He trained Indian soldiers in European military techniques. Clear? He trained Indian soldiers into the European military techniques, like he created disciplined infantry soldiers. Disciplined infantry soldiers were called as sepoys. Fine. Okay. Duplic also developed the strategy of indirect rule. He also developed strategy of indirect rule. That means how indirect rule? Duplic said that we are going to support this particular ruler and we will help them in making the or taking the throne. That means Duplic wanted to create the puppet Indian rulers. Clear? So Duplic actually intervened in War of Succession and then he created puppet ruler. Fine? Okay. Now after this, the Carnatic Wars started in 18th century. Now this is something related to Carnatic Wars. Clear? Now try to understand Carnatic War 1746 to 1763. Series of conflict took place between Britain and France. Fine. Initial success. What was their initial success? Initial success of French. So Duplic was able to capture Madras. Madras was under the control of English. So Duplic captured which region? Madras region in 1746. Clear? But gradually French lost the ground to British. Clear? Gradually French lost the ground to British, and soon you will see that French was only limited to Pondicherry. So gradually their colony was reduced to Pondicherry. That means British defeated French. Clear? In this way, British became main power, main European power in India, and India became colony of British. Fine. Okay. Now, now let's talk about their cultural policy. Fine. Now, what was their cultural policy? See, unlike Portuguese, like Dutch, unlike Portuguese, French colonial power, they did not much intervene in Indian social religious life. है ना? तो डच के जैसे ही बट पोर्चुगीज की तरह बिल्कुल भी नहीं. इवन फ्रेंच पीपल दे डिड नॉट इंटरवीन इन इंडियन सोशल रिलीजियस कस्टम्स. फाइन. ठीक है. बट इट इज सेड दैट देयर वाज वन रेयर एक्सेप्शन दैट दे हैव डिस्ट्रॉयड Pondicherry's large Veda Purishwaran temple. Ved Purishwaran temple. Clear? Duplic, he actually demolished, he destroyed Veda Purishwaran temple in 1748. It is said that it was ordered by Duplic on the persistent request of Jesuit priest. है ना? ऐसा कहा जाता है that Jesuit priest requested him and even Duplic wife requested him to destroy this temple. Clear? है ना? Why? So that they can show the dominance of Christianity. Fine. So this is something which is there. So they basically contended with modest amount of trade with India. That is their importance. Okay. Now after this, enter the British. Now Britishers. Now we need to understand. Clear? Now Britishers. The most important theme that I know regarding the British, their transformation from traders. They came as traders and they made their territory colony. Traders to territory or rulers. Clear? These things. Now, what is the unique path, unique story of British? Fine. So that we need to understand. Now, first we need to understand the classical context, concept, and as well as British method. How British conquest is different from the classic conquest. As you can see, traders to rulers, classic conquest, and British conquest. Clear? Now, try to understand. First thing that British, they took over India. It was a gradual move. It was calculated move, and they often disguised as commercial enterprise rather than military invasion. They actually showed themselves as a company, है ना, as a commercial people. So their policy was no military invasion. Clear? Their move was gradual, calculated move they did. Clear? In this way, you will see that trading company transformed into an imperial power. This is how trading company transformed into an imperial power. Fine. Now, after this, the phase starts, early phase. Now, early phase. Now, we need to understand this early phase, that is 17th to 18th century. Fine, 17th to 18th century. Now, English East India Company was established as a trading company, and English East India Company was also granted a royal charter from whom? Queen Elizabeth I in 1601. Queen Elizabeth I gave a royal charter to East India Company. Fine. Now, royal charter gave special powers to East India Company. What was that special power to East India Company? That East India Company can raise a private army, for instance. Fine. They can establish their own private army. Now, what was their initial strategy? See, initially they actually pretended that they are just a trader. Fine. And gradually they started establishing their footholds along India's coast with minimal resistance, like in Surat, Bombay, Madras, Calcutta. They were the first region. Fine. Now, what was the local ruler's perspective? Local ruler did not mind these trading posts. They thought they are just traders only. So they were welcomed by the local ruler. They generally welcomed the foreign trade. Fine. This was the modest beginnings. Clear? And that resulted into the company's long-term ambitions. Remember this. Clear? This is something which is very important. Now, after this, what was the strategy applied by the British? Strategy of divide and rule. Fine. Now, what is the core principle? Now, what is the core principle of divide and rule? First of all, they cultivated, company के जो agent थे, they cultivated political relationships with colonial rulers. Clear? Then second, these company agents, these East India Company people, they offered military support to some Indian ruler against their rivals. Clear? Third important thing, these company people, they inserting themselves into Indian political conflict. They started interfering in Indian political conflict, war of succession, etc. Gradually, these East India Company people, they emerged as a power broker rather than foreign invaders. This is the policy of divide and rule. Clear? Now, what is the method? Now, we need to understand the method that you are going to see here. Method. So, what are the methods? First, they started playing on rivalries between regional rulers. Like regional ruler, they used to fight among themselves, so they started interfering in that rivalries. That is the first method. Second, they started exploiting the succession disputes. Clear? Succession disputes. War of succession chal raha hai, so they, like if the war of succession is going on between two contenders, so they are going to support one, and then they will make that person as a puppet ruler. Clear? Then third important thing, they also actually brought this divide and rule policy, and they identified and encouraged tension between religious communities. They also increased the tension between religious communities. Yes, like Hindu Muslim made, so like like Britishers destroyed Hindu Muslim unity. Fine, this thing was also there, and in this way they position themselves as kingmaker. So in this way, British position themselves as king makers. Fine, remember this. Now, so based on these methods, the most important battle that took place, that is Battle of Plassey. This is the most important battle which took place based on this, called as Battle of Plassey. This 1757, this battle was actually a turning point. Fine, this was actually a turning point. Remember this thing. Okay, it's a turning point. Fine. Now, This battle took place between whom? Nawab of Bengal and East India Company. So who was the Nawab? So when the tension started between Nawab Shiraj Uddaulah and Nawab Shiraj Uddaulah, who was the Nawab of Bengal, and East India Company. East India, from the side of East India Company, who was the official? Robert Clive. Fine. This was started, and when Robert Clive saw that there are fragmented people in the court of Shiraj Uddaulah, so he identified disgruntled elements within the Nawab's court. So what Clive is going to do? Clive is going to do the conspiracy against the Nawab, like Nawab's court people who are against the Nawab. So Clive is going to bribe them. है ना? Clive will create the conspiracy with them to remove Nawab Shirajuddaula. Fine. Okay. So in this scenario, Clive has a conspiracy with Mir Jafar. Mir Jafar कौन था? He was actually the commander in chief of Shirajuddaula. Commander in chief of Shirajuddaula. Clear? So East India Company, that means Robert Clive, promised Mir Jafar that they are going to make Mir Jafar as a Nawab of Bengal. Clear? They will install Mir Jafar as Nawab of Bengal, and because of this, Mir Jafar will betray with Shirajuddaula, and this resulted into a battle called as Palashi or Plashi. Clear? Battle of Plashi. Clear? It is said that Plashi was around 150 kilometers from present day Kolkata region. Clear? Remember this thing. Now, in this battle, it is said that some French forces assisted Nawab Shirajuddaula, but Mir Jafar forces, which actually constituting the majority of Nawab army, so Mir Jafar forces have not supported Shirajuddaula. Clear? That is why Mir Jafar came to be called as traitor. He is considered as traitor or in India. Mir Jafar is considered as traitor in India. Clear? Now, after this, so here Robert Clive actually applied which policy? Robert Clive applied the policy of Kingmaker. Fine. Okay. Now after this, so try to understand the first formula that East India Company applied, the policy of King Maker. Okay. In this, East India Company, okay, positioned itself as a king maker. Fine. And gradually, East India Company established its control over large territories of India. Fine. What was the second policy? Second policy is doctrine of lapse. Fine. Second policy is related to doctrine of lapse. Now, doctrine of lapse is the policy of 19th century. Fine. Now, what is doctrine of lapse? See, according to this policy, okay, any princely state would be annexed. Any princely state would be annexed if the ruler of that princely state dies without a natural male heir or without having a biological son, his own son, which means adopted son will not get the throne. Clear? So this deliberately disregarded Hindu tradition of adoption. Hindu tradition में adoption था हमेशा से. Clear? Which was a legitimate means of succession in Indian royal houses. In this scenario, you will see numerous states were annexed. Fine. In this scenario, numerous states were annexed. Fine. Okay. So this was the second policy. This doctrine of lapse is very important, which led to the annexation of numerous states. Fine. And because of this, British territorial expansion was also done. Clear? And doctrine of lapse was introduced by whom? It was actually introduced by Lord Dalhousie. Fine. It was introduced by Lord Dalhousie. His timeline 1848 to 1856. So when Lord Dalhousie came, he started this doctrine of lapse. Second important, so this doctrine of lapse played very important role in the revolt of 1857. Fine. Now, third important policy was subsidiary alliance. This was actually implemented in India by Lord Wellesley. 1798 to 1805. Lord Wellesley used this policy. Fine. Okay. Now, under this subsidiary alliance, in this subsidiary alliance, a British resident will sit in the court of Indian rulers. Clear? Then, in this alliance, British claim to protect Indian rulers against internal and external threat. Under this alliance, they used to say that we are going to protect you against internal or external threats. In exchange, they would have to maintain British troops. कि हम आपको protect करेंगे, but you need to maintain the British troops and you have to pay the maintenance. Indian rulers have to pay the maintenance. Clear? And Indian rulers can conduct foreign relations, but only through the British. In this way, okay, in this way, if we see in this way, Indian rulers, they were losing autonomy. Fine, clear. This is something which is very important. We need to understand here. Now, in this way, you will see empire on the cheap. Empire on the cheap. What does this mean? See, in this way, Britishers, they were able to control the vast territories. They were able to control the vast territories, as you can see here, control the vast territories without administrative cost of direct route. British को cost bear ही नहीं करना पड़ा है. Who is going to bear cost? The cost was like beared by whom? It was actually bear by the Indian rulers. This is called as empire on the cheap. बहुत सस्ते में empire बना लिया Britishers. Clear? That is very important. Now, which was the first kingdom which entered into the subsidiary lines? Ruler of Hyderabad, Nizam of Hyderabad. Nizam of Hyderabad was the first state entered into the subsidiary alliance with British in 1798. Clear? This is something which is very important. Fine. Now, so now try to understand. Okay. So now, as you can see here, so in this way, we can say that Britishers were able to control large number of area. Clear? Now, with respect to princely state, so to preserve the sovereignty of princely state, around 500, okay, over 500 princely states were there at the time of independence. Fine, and it covered 40% of Indian subcontinent. Clear? Like Hyderabad, Mysore, Travancore, all these things were there. Fine. So these were the policies of the British. Okay. Now next is from paradise to hell. Now it is related to economic exploitation and famines. Economic exploitation and famine. Okay. Now revenue extraction. This revenue extraction was actually related to paradise to hell. Fine. कैसे समझिए. So few years after the victory at Plassey, है ना, when East India Company won the war of Battle of Plassey, then East India Company secured the right to collect revenue in Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa, and this region was one of the richest regions. ठीक है. So Robert Clive described Bengal as paradise of earth, where prosperity was there. So in this way, they brought which policy? Extraction policy. They brought extraction policy. Fine. Okay. So in this scenario, they started extracting the maximum revenue. They started extracting maximum revenue, and at the same time, they were investing minimal in governance or development. Clear? This resulted into the devastating consequence of population. Okay. And because of this system, the Great Famine of Bengal came in 1770 to 72. Bengal famine. Fine. Now, This 2 years of crop failure, harsh revenue collection targets, which was imposed by East India Company in Bengal, it actually required farmers to pay high rate of taxes on their produce of lands. Clear? But famine came. Clear? So harvesting condition was catastrophic famine. And because of this famine, around 10 million deaths, 10 million people died because of this. Fine. Now, what was the British response? British response. So company still maintained, though famine was there, but company still maintained harsh revenue collection targets. They actually increased the land tax during famine. कहाँ से देगा इंसान? Clear? Such cruelty was denounced later, right? And it was criticized by Indian personalities, some British officials and public intellectuals also like William Digby. Clear? These people criticize these things. Clear? Remember this. This is something which is very important. Now, there are some structural cases or structural, we can say structural causes of famine. There are some structural causes of famine. Fine? Okay. Now, first important structural causes of famine was British economic policy. We need to understand here British economic, okay, policy. Now, what was the British economic policy that we need to understand? First important policy is free market policy that we need to understand. Clear? First important policy, as you can see here, British economic policy, it was free market policy. Free market policy का मतलब क्या है? It actually left prices of commodities free to fluctuate. State is not having any control. State का कोई role ही नहीं रहेगा. So in this way, it was free to fluctuate the prices. Clear? That resulted into the severity of famines. Clear? In this, no government intervention was there. No government intervention was there, and it contributed to famine severity. Clear? That is why the Great Famine again came during the time period of Lord Lytton, who was the Viceroy. Great, Lord Lytton, Viceroy of India, during 1876 to 78, famine came, and he issued an order. There is to be no interference of any kind on part of government with object of reducing the price of good. That was his official statement. Can you understand? Clear? That government will not take any measure, and at the same time Lord Lytton was spending large amount of money. See, he's spending large amount of money. He organized the Delhi Darbar, extravagant Darbar in Delhi. Clear? And in this, they conducted a feast for 68,000 officials, for Maharajas, all these things. At the same time, people were dying due to hunger, due to famine, poverty, all these things. Clear? So these things were there. Then apart from this, okay, apart from this, as you can see this paragraph also, clear, like grain export during famine. Okay. So British administration, they actually continued the grain export during this period also. Clear? They continued the, remember this thing, they continued exporting the food grains from India. Around 1 million tons of rice was actually exported, in these 3 years. 1 million ton of rice was exported, when at the same time people were died due to hunger. Fine. This was the scenario, and total estimate death, as you can see here, 50 to 100 million number of deaths, even caused by nearly a death toll equal to the Second World War. इतने ज्यादा लोग मर रहे थे उस टाइम पे. Fine, these things were there, and in this scenario, one famine commission was created 1878 to 80. Clear? Now, famine commission was created, and it says that the doctrine that in time of famine the poor are entitled to demand relief. This famine commission said that state needs to give them relief. Clear, and that is why in future you will see one famine law will come into the picture. Fine. Okay. Now, after this drain of wealth, so as you can see here, a political scientist in 1895, US historian and political scientist Brooke Adams, he noted, है ना, that very soon after the Battle of Plassey, the Bengal plunder began to arrive in London. Whatever the resources in Bengal was there, it was sent to London, and the effect appears to have been instantaneous. Like for all authorities agreed that industrial revolution began in the year of 1760. Possibly since the world began, no investment has ever yielded the profit reaped from Indian plunder. So at the same time, Britishers, they started the industrial revolution and they used to earn profit here. They used to take the revenue from India and they used to send to London because they needed money for industrial revolution. Fine. So industrial revolution in Britain, if you see, fine. So, like according to Brooke Adams, industrial revolution in Britain required much investment, clear, but it was made possible. So, industrial revolution of Britain in is actually funded partly by the stolen wealth from India. ब्रिटेन का इंडस्ट्रियल रेवोल्यूशन कैसे बना है? इंडिया से जो वेल्थ इन्होंने प्लंडर किया. क्लियर, दैट इज समथिंग विच इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट. And this phrase is used by the US historian William Durant also. Clear? Okay. Now, apart from this, there are various documents regarding the wealth drain. Documents regarding wealth drain. Fine? Okay. Now, try to understand. Like Dada Bhai Naroji. Clear? Adams, Digby, Dada Bhai Naroji. All these are respected figures. Like Dada Bhai Naroji authored a book, Poverty and Un-British Rule in India. Clear? And in which he actually compiled the reports from British, the wealth estimated to have been drained out of India. And he was also the first in Dada Bhai Naroji was also the first Indian elected to the House of Commons. Dada Bhai Naroji was the first Indian elected, first Indian, okay, to be elected in House of Commons of British, lower house of British Parliament. Fine, remember this. Now, next is R.C. Dutt. He was a historian. He wrote a book, Economic History of India. Similar thing. So they made some estimates. Clear? So early historians, early studies actually showed colonizers, they have extracted many billions of pounds from India. They have taken large amount of money from India. Clear? And the most recent estimate by Utsa Patnaik, most recent estimate by Utsa Patnaik says that from 1765 to 1938, 65 to 1938, around 45 trillion US dollars in today's value, or 13 times of British GDP in 2023, was plundered from India. Clear? And this extraction was not just through the taxes, also by charging Indians for colonial powers expenditure on building railways, telegraph network, and even on wars also. Fine. This is something which is very important that we need to understand. Fine. Clear? So Dada Bhai Naroji wrote a book, Un-British Rule, and he was also elected to House of Commons. Clear? Now, so now we need to understand the changing landscape. Fine. So now try to understand the changing landscapes. So changing landscape, this is something economic, like economic impact, economic impact of British rule. Fine. Economic impact of or colonial impact. Clear. Colonial impact on India. Clear. Now, try to understand. First of all, there was decline of indigenous industries. Decline of indigenous industries. कैसे? For example, pre-18th century, before 18th century, India is actually known for manufacturing capabilities like in textiles, cotton, silk, wool, jute, hemp, coir being. These were the chief things. Clear. Indian cotton textiles was having rich and intricate designs. Clear. And textures were also there from ultra thin muslins to richly embossed fabrics, and they were very high in demand in many parts of the world. They were highly in demand. Fine. Now, what was the British policy? How they started, you can say, exploiting Indian industry. So what Britishers they are going to do? They started imposing the heavy duties on Indian textiles imported into Britain. Clear? So they started imposing what? Heavy duties on Indian textiles which were imported into Britain. In second important thing, it forced India to accept the British manufactured good minimal tariff, and whatever the goods that are coming from the Britain, clear. So those goods were actually based on minimal tariff. That means the British goods were cheaper in India. In this way, India will become the market of British. Clear, but Indian goods were highly like taxable. High tariffs were there when it used to enter in Britain. In this way, Indian goods will be discouraged by Britishers as well as Indians also. Clear. In this way, we can say British also control the sea trade as well as exchange rate at that time. So Indian traders found difficult to export as earlier. Clear. In this way, deindustrialization was started. So what will happen? Indian textile industry will start declining. Ruin of Indian textile industry. Clear? है ना? Then Indian textile exports they also fell sharply. Britain imports into India it will start increasing. Clear? Now skilled artisan communities who used to employed in indigenous industries. So skilled artisans, clear, they were reduced to poverty and they were forced return to subsistence agriculture. है ना? They will start practicing the agriculture on overtaxed land. Fine. This is something which is very important that we need to understand. Like William Bentinck, who was the Governor General of India. William Bentinck was the first Governor General of India. Fine. Now, he observed in 1834 that the bones of the cotton weavers are bleaching the plains of India. Bones of cotton weavers are bleaching the plains of India. Fine. These things were there. And there was decline in other sectors also. Other sectors in the sense like iron, steel, paper, and other goods also. Clear? So remember this thing. So similar decline in other sectors also, and India's share of world GDP kept declining. Clear? At one point of time, it was 1/4, but now it kept declining throughout the colonial rule. Clear? From 1/4, and it hardly reached 5% at the time of independence. In less than 2 centuries, one of the richest land of the world, that is India, had become the poorest land of the world. Clear? This is something which is very important that we need to understand. Okay. Now, not only economic impact, Britishers also impacted our traditional governance structure, like before, or you can say pre-British system, pre-British system. Right? Okay. Now, India used to have well organized system of local governance. Clear? Village councils used to be there. Now village council, what was their work? They used to manage the community affairs. They used to resolve the disputes, organize public works like irrigation, roads, etc. These things were there. Then regional kingdoms, they actually maintained complex administrative structure. Clear? So this complex administrative structure which evolved over centuries to address the local needs as well as conditions. Fine. Now, in this scenario, the Charles Metcalfe, who was the acting Governor General in 1830s. Now, Charles Metcalfe, he said one important line that village communities are little republics having nearly everything they want within themselves. They seem to last where nothing else lasts. Dynasty after dynasty tumbles down. Revolution succeeds to revolution, but village community remains the same. Mughals आए, Turks आए, सब आए, but village community of India remains the same. And this union of village communities, each one forming a separate little state in itself. Village communities was a very small state in itself, and they have contributed more than any other cause to the preservation of people of India. This was mentioned by whom? Charles Metcalfe. Clear? Now, what will be the British approach? Now, they systematically dismantled the indigenous governance system. They replaced them with centralized bureaucracy. Britishers started replacing the village governance structure with centralized bureaucracy, which was primarily designed for tax collection, maintain law and order rather than promoting the public welfare. And they actually destroyed centuries old mechanisms of community decision making. Fine? Okay. Now, legal system transformation was also there. Now, how legal system transformation? See, Britishers, they have introduced what? They have introduced the British Code of Law. They introduced British codes of law. In this way, what will happen? The religious codes of India or personal laws of India will start declining. And British Code of Law disregarded the customs laws and practices that actually govern the Indian communities for longer generations. Clear? In this way, they also alienated, we can say, they also alienated ordinary Indians from judicial system. Clear? And they have created their own judicial system where they have created courts, and courts were expensive, time consuming, and those courts were conducted in English language, that is foreign language. Fine? Okay. Now, transforming Indian education, that means creating brown Englishmen, creating Indian Englishmen. Clear? Now try to understand. Education is the very powerful tool, okay, to create a class of Indians. Fine. So what happened in pre-colonial times, earlier centuries or pre-colonial era? Pre-colonial times. Now, what was there in pre-colonial times? India had diverse educational traditions. Pathshalas used to be there. Pathshala means Hindu schools. Hindu schools, madrasas, Muslim schools, viharas, Buddhist schools were there. Then apprenticeship learning was there, and then they also transmitted not only practical knowledge but also cultural values as well as tradition. Fine. Okay. Now in early 19th century, that means pre 1835. Pre 1835, what was the situation? Try to understand. So British report says that hundreds of thousands of village schools across India, like 1 lakh to 1 lakh 50,000 of them in Bengal, Bihar. Clear? These things were there. So where young natives, young Indians were taught reading, writing and arithmetic. Clear? And the system of education was very cheap, was economical. Clear? And it was simple also and effective also. Fine. Now the turning point came when Macaulay Minute was introduced. As you can see, turning point was in 1835 when Macaulay Minute. Fine. Macaulay Minute was used. Fine. Macaulay Minute came in 1835, which actually replaced Persian language with Indian language. From 1835, English has become the official language of India. Now, this Macaulay language says that there will be no knowledge of either Sanskrit and Arabic. Macaulay said he had no knowledge of either Sanskrit or Arabic, and he expressed his conviction that European knowledge was vastly superior to India's. European knowledge India se superior hai. Clear? And what was the objective of Macaulay? The objective of Macaulay was, as you can see, Indians in blood and color, like Indian people, they will be Indians in blood and color, but in thinking, in taste, they will be English. In opinions, in morals, in intellect, they will be English. So basically, they wanted to do brainwash of Indians. Clear? So in this way, Macaulay policy actually gained the upper hand. As you can see, gained upper hand in India's traditional schools gradually disappeared. Fine. So English actually became the language of prestige, clear, which is associated with colonial master, and it resulting into the it has actually created the divisions in society between English educated elites as well as masses. Fine. Okay. Now, so now we need to understand reshaping economic structures to serve imperial needs. Clear? Now we need to understand. So this is basically a transformation of Indian economy from self-sufficient agricultural system to a craft and manufacture production into the supplier of raw material. So India, which was the manufacturing unit, clear, manufacturing center, India, which was self-sufficient in agriculture, now India just became the supplier of raw material for British industries because industrial revolution was going on in England. So India used to send the raw materials. India became the market for finished goods. India is a market which was forced to buy the British goods, that we need to understand. Clear? So this was the change. So we can say it was not a gift from the colonial rulers. It was mostly paid by Indian revenues. Fine. It was not a gift of colonial rulers. Okay. It was paid by Indian tax revenues. Fine. Indian funded infrastructure was there, like railways were created. Clear? Railways were there. So while railways did bring people closer together, railways also integrated India's internal market. Clear? So railways were designed to move raw material from interior to ports for export region and to distribute British goods throughout India. Clear? So railway routes largely ignored the existing trade pattern. Railway route ignored the existing trade pattern, and railways used to serve the colonial interest only. Fine. This is something which is very important. Okay. So it was not a gift from colonial rulers to India. It was paid by Indian tax revenue only. Fine. Second important thing, telegraph network. So when we say telegraph network, it was also funded by Indian taxation. Clear? This is also funded by Indian taxation only. Clear? Indian taxpayers' money, and it served colonial interest. It served commercial interest. This is funded by Indians but benefited British people. Clear? Then, as you can see, this paragraph, administrative cost of colonialism. Now, this administrative cost of colonialism borne by Indian subjects. Fine. Colonial administrative apparatus like military installation, lavish lifestyle of British officials. Clear? All these things are financed by whom? Indian taxation. So Indians funded their own subjugation. हमने खुद हमारा subjugation fund किया. Clear? These things were there. Now, because of these things, resistance movements started, which started challenging the colonial authority. Clear? So early resistance movement which challenged the colonial authority. Clear? See, India was known for the enormous source of wealth, natural and human resources for the British. That is why Britishers, they used to nickname her the jewel in the crown of British Empire. India was the jewel in the crown of British Empire. Clear? And they asserted that India would forever remain part of British Empire. Okay? That means on which the sun never sets. Clear? Okay. Now we need to understand the early revolt, early resistance. Now we'll talk about early resistance. As you can see here, Sannyasi Fakir rebellion. This is related to early resistance. Early resistance. Fine. Okay. Now we'll talk about Sannyasi Fakir rebellion. Now, Sannyasi Fakir rebellion, this is one of the earliest organized resistance movement. Clear? Now, where it was started? It was started in Bengal, began in Bengal after the terrible famine of 1770. Clear? So, it is also called a Sannyasi rebellion. Clear? Why it is called a Sannyasi rebellion? Because who participated in this group of sannyasis or Hindu ascetics or fakir Muslim ascetics? They participated. Fine. Now, why they participated? See, traditionally freedom was given. Traditionally, they used to travel freely for the pilgrimage, charity. Clear? And gradually they saw that the movement of sannyasi and fakir, their movement was restricted by the British East India Company policies. Okay, especially by new land and taxation policies. So what was the nature of the revolt? So in this scenario, over the next 3 decades, clear, they attacked British treasuries as well as sannyasis also attacked tax collectors. Clear? And Britishers used to call them as bandits. Clear? And British, they executed some of these sannyasis. They used their superior forces to defeat these sannyasis. So what was the legacy? This rebellion later inspired the famous Bengali writer whose name was Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay. Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay wrote a novel called as Anand Mat. In this novel, he talked about the sannyasi revolt, and this novel was written in 1882, and this novel also contain a song called as Vande Mataram. Vande Mataram, which was composed by Bankim Chandra Chattopadhyay. Clear? And this inspired Indians during the struggle of freedom movement. Clear? And gradually it became the India's national song after the independence. Clear? This is very important. Then second is tribal uprisings. Now tribal communities also face threats. Tribals also faced threats. Fine. Now they also face unique threats. Clear? Now what were the threats? Now try to understand. Like British started expanding into the forest and hill areas. This actually disrupted the traditional way of life of tribals. Second, British categorized tribals as primitive in nature. British restricted their access to forest and forest produce also. Clear? British acquired the tribal land, clear, and turned tribal land into the private property. Also imposed cash taxes, and in this way tribals were fall into the debt trap. Clear? In this way, Britishers replaced the traditional tribal councils, clear, with British legal system. Gradually, British also encouraged the Christian missionaries, clear, to civilize them and convert these tribals into Christianity. Clear. Besides this, a colonial law categorized hundreds of tribal communities as criminal tribes. Colonial law ने hundreds of tribes को क्या कहा? As a criminal tribes. Clear. So they started harassing them. Britishers started harassing them. In this scenario, various uprisings took place. Like first important uprising, coal uprisings. Second, Santhal. As you can see, coal uprising took place in Chota Nagpur, present day Jharkhand region. Clear? Now, why this was started? Because British introduced land policies that actually favored outsiders over original tribal inhabitant. Land kiski tribal ki hai, but the British policy was favoring the outsiders. Clear? So, coal tribes, which included the Mundas and Oraon, these tribes also, and they gradually temporarily established their control over significant territory, है ना? But later they were defeated by the British. Second, Santhal rebellion. Okay, now Santhal rebellion, what was the issue here? Santhal, present day Jharkhand region, Bihar, West Bengal. This uprising was actually led by two brothers, Sidhu and Kanhu Murmu. Sidhu and Kanhu Murmu. And in Santhal uprising, they actually rebelled against the money lenders and landlords. Now, these money lenders and landlords, they were actually taking the ancestral lands of uh, tribal people. Clear? So, in this scenario, Santhals, they have created their own government. As you can see, Santhals declared their own government, and they promised themselves to fight against the British rule, to fight to the last drop of blood. And in this, the response of British was also brutal. Clear? So Britishers ने क्या किया? They burned entire villages. They killed thousands of Santhals. Eventually, they started killing the rebel leaders also. Clear? And this rebellion actually inspired other tribal communities to resist the colonial rule. Fine. Okay. Now, another important event, peasant uprising against economic exploitation. Now, how peasant uprising against economic exploitation? See, the most important revolt that took place, that is Indigo revolt. Clear? So without famines, peasants suffered under the unfair policies of British, like revenue collection, and peasants also started losing their lands to the money lenders or new landlords. That is why the most important revolt took place, called as Indigo revolt, 1859 to 1862. Now where this Indigo revolt took place? Now this Indigo revolt took place in northern Bengal area. Clear? What was there in under this revolt? European planters, they used to force peasants in northern parts of Bengal, and European planters used to pressurize these peasants to stop cultivating the food crops and grow indigo. Why indigo? Because indigo was used as a dye in textile industry. It was very high in demand in Europe. Fine, that was the most important thing. So in this way, planters and traders, they used to earn a huge number of profits, and in this way, the peasants who were poorly paid, and they got trapped into the debt slavery. Clear? So what was the British repression? So when peasants refused to grow the indigo, they face imprisonment, they face torture and destruction of their property. So their uprising was directly, or you can say directed, mostly at the planters. This uprising was mostly against the European planters. Clear? And European planters who retaliated by hiring mercenaries to attack on the peasants. Clear? Now, this Indigo revolt was also supported by educated Bengalis as well as Bengali press. Clear? That is why British authorities, they were eventually forced to restrict some of the worst abuses. Clear? These things were there. So all these revolts took place during this period. And finally, from 1757, that is the day of Battle of Plassey, 1757, year of Plassey, to 1857, year of Great Rebellion or Great Revolt in India. It has completed 100 years of exploitation. When 100 years of exploitation was completed, then different communities participated against the British. So, revolt of 1857, it is not due to a single cause, due to multiple cause, an accumulation of anger since last 100 years of exploitation by the British. Fine. This is also called as Sepoy Mutiny. Clear? Now, this Sepoy Mutiny, the term used by the British. Who used this term? British used this term. Clear? Indians use the term Great Rebellion. Indians use the term called as Great Rebellion. Clear? Now, what is Sepoy? Indian soldiers in East India Company called as Sepoys. Clear? Indian soldiers in East India Company called as Sepoy. Fine? And the officers were almost British. Fine? Now, my first question here is there any other mutiny before this revolt of 1857? Then yes, the name of that mutiny was Vellore Mutiny of 1806. Before this revolt of 1857, there was one more mutiny called as Vellore Mutiny. Clear? And why Vellore Mutiny erupted? This Vellore Mutiny actually erupted when new uniform regulations came. Clear? Earlier, what used to happen in the army? Hindus used to put tilak, used to wear their dress. Muslims used to have their beard. But when in Vellore, why Vellore Mutiny? Because Britishers, they brought uniform regulation that actually violated the religious practices, that stopped the religious practices in the army, that Hindus cannot show their symbols, Muslims also cannot show their symbols. So these sepoys, they thought that now our religious freedom is taken. Clear? They were forbidden from wearing the religious marks on their foreheads, and they were required to shave their beards also, which was against the Muslims. That is why in this scenario, the sepoys, they seized the Vellore fort in Tamil Nadu, and they killed many British officers and troops. But Britishers, they crushed the revolt. They killed hundreds of sepoys. Fine, this was there. Now, again, the structural grievance of sepoys in revolt of 1857. What happened? What was the structural grievance of sepoys? First is socio-economic context. We need to understand. Clear? Structural grievances. Fine. Now, most of these sepoys were from agricultural families. They actually suffered great hardship owing to British policies on land revenue. And after the decades of frustration in 1857, the rumor was spread. What was that rumor? Spread across northern and central India that the rifle cartridges, the rifles that were used by the sepoys, that rifle cartridges greased with cow and pig fat. That cow offended Hindus and pig fat offended Muslim sepoys. Clear? In this scenario, you'll see at Barakpur regiment in West Bengal, the sepoy Mangal Pandey attacked British officer. Clear? And later Mangal Pandey was executed. That has created further discontent among the Indian sepoys. Now, after this, in Meerut is in UP. Clear? So, in Meerut, what happened? Some of these sepoys killed British officers, and those sepoys they marched from Meerut to Delhi. And when those sepoys reached Delhi, they proclaimed the elder Bahadur Shah Zafar as their leader. That Bahadur Shah Zafar is the Mughal emperor. They said that Bahadur Shah Zafar is their leader, and they announced their revolt in the leadership of Bahadur Shah Zafar only. Fine. So military decisions were actually taken by the commanders, and gradually you will see that revolt spread across northern and central India. Some of these sepoys captured important cities like Kanpur, Lucknow and Jhansi. At Kanpur, the rebel forces sepoys under the leadership of Nana Sahib initially agreed to give safe passage to British civilians. He said, we need to give safe passage to British civilians, but then they started massacring the British civilian. Around 200 men, women, and children they were killed. Fine. So this reason is still debated by the historians. Fine. Okay. Now, what was the British response in this? See, British response was systematic but extremely brutal. Fine. Now we need to understand the British response. First important thing that we need to understand that Rani Lakshmi Bai in this revolt. Fine. So Rani Lakshmi Bai, she fought bravely to save the kingdom from British. Clear? So from September 1857, Britishers they started recapturing Delhi. Clear? And Britishers they also conducted house to house massacre at Kanpur. British they conducted the mass execution which designed to strike terror in the population, to create a fear in the population. Clear? Britishers they burned large number of villages. They destroyed crops and various deaths were there. Then apart from this, the Great Rebellion failed because sepoys lacked unified command. Clear? They lacked consistent strategy. Fine, these things were there. But there are some of the heroes of this event like Rani Lakshmi Bai that we need to understand. Okay. For example, as you can see, two important personalities from this revolt. Rani Lakshmi Bai of Jhansi, she fought bravely to save her kingdom from the British annexation. And Rani Lakshmi Bai was also assisted by Maratha Tatya Tope. Clear? Tatya Tope was also the commander of Nana Sahib. Clear? He was the commander as well as military advisor of Nana Sahib. So Rani Lakshmi Bai managed to escape a besieged Jhansi and to conquer Gwalior fort. Clear? And she was killed on 18th June 1858 in the battlefield. And who was the British official who killed her? Hugroves. A British official who killed her, Hugroves. Fine. This was very important. And then Tatya Tope, he continued on fighting. Clear? And Tatya Tope, as you can see, he continued on fighting until early 1859. But Tatya Tope was actually betrayed by his friend Jai Singh Sindhia, friend. You know, that Jai Singh informed British that Tatya Tope was hiding in the jungles of Chambal, and then he was handed over to British, and British hanged him. Another important female leader from of this revolt was Begum Hazrat Mahal of Awadh. Now, Begum Hazrat Mahal, she was the widow of Nawab Wajid Ali Shah. Clear? And she also resisted the British-led resistance. Clear? After her kingdom annexed. And she also joined the rebel of 1857. And she defended the Lucknow when British tried to recapture the city. Clear? And she rejected the British offers of safe passage. British के offer को reject कर दिया, है ना? And if she surrendered, ultimately she had to take refuge nearby Nepal. Clear? So she escaped to Nepal later. Fine. This much is clear to all of you. So I hope this much is clear now. So this is one of the important reasons that we need to understand. So, so finally, this revolt was started in 1857 and it was completely suppressed by 1858. And then Queen Victoria issued a proclamation. Queen Victoria, Queen of England, she issued a proclamation which marked that the end of East India Company rule in India. And after 1858, whose rule was started? Crown rule was started in India. So in 1858, end of company rule, and from 1858 to 1947, crown rule started. That means India became direct colony of British. Fine. This is something which is very important. Clear? So we need to understand. So Britishers, they actually suppressed this revolt brutally. Fine. So this is something which is very important. Now, another important thing, the legacy of European colonialism in India. So what is the legacy? First of all, there is one debate. What is the nature of colonialism? It talks about the nature of colonialism. Now, what was the nature of colonialism? Reality versus myth. है ना? So, see, European conquest or rule of India was not a civilizing mission. It was not a civilizing mission. India civilization was much older than the British, if you see. Fine. Now, European civilization was actually a process of subjugation and exploitation. Clear? They were actually exploiting the Indians. They executed systematically with brutal repression if necessary. Clear? So what was the result? Clear? What was the result? So except for small Indian elite, those who accepted the British rule as inevitable, Indians actually suffered the fate of many of world's colonized population. They had to suffer the abuse, exploitation, violence, and uprooting of British rule. Fine. Then there were some unintended consequences also. Now, what are the unintended consequences? First of all, it actually opened India to the world. Clear? It opened India to the world. Now, Britishers were systematic in documenting every aspect of their conquest. They systematically documented everything from its geography to everything, to culture also. Clear? So, basically, they created the list of all ethnic groups. Clear? Although the list were flawed because of the unscientific but prevalent notions of race. Clear? They also documented India's monuments. They studied Indian art and architecture. They also they stored some of the ruined architectures also. They stored and repaired them, and they created the discipline of archaeology. Clear? So where they restored the some ruined monuments. Fine. So they started collecting all those things. Okay. Now, so there were some British scholars who were not first Europeans to master the Sanskrit language. They started. So, although British scholars were not the first Europeans to master the Sanskrit language, various Islamic rulers were also there who mastered in Sanskrit language. But British started publishing some of the important things like translation of Sanskrit text into European language, like the French, Germans, and others. They also started. You can say translating Indian scriptures, like Charles Dickens translated Bhagavad Gita. Clear? Charles Dickens translated what? Bhagavad Gita. Fine. Then apart from this, so why they were translating? So they were trying to understanding Indian culture. Clear? And that is why they were studying the Indian language and text, so that it would be easier to demonstrate. It would be easier to demonstrate the superiority of Christianity. So they will translate in that way where they can show their supremacy in terms of Christianity or in terms of their culture and religion. Clear? This is something which is important. So this is all about in this chapter. So finally we have discussed, we have completed this chapter, and in this chapter what are the things that we have discussed? We talked about the colonial India. We have completed colonial India from 1757 to 1857 and the exploitative policies of the British. Fine. So various policies that we have discussed, like administrative policy, doctrine of lapse, Then subsidiary alliance. Okay. Kingmaker, divide and rule. Okay. Then we also discuss the economic concepts, like various new concepts Indians came to know: GDP, drain of wealth. Then remember we have discussed empire on the cheap. Yes, empire on the cheap. So I hope this much is clear to all of you. So finally we have completed all the chapters related to history from class 8th NCERT. Fine. So I hope this much is clear. This chapter is wonderful, that this chapter actually gives you the basic and holistic view of colonial India. So once you complete this chapter, then you should read advanced. I hope this much is clear. So this is all about colonial India. So thank you for watching this video. Thank you so much.